Hello and welcome to the second episode of our webinar on the NIS2 directive. Today with me is Jasper Nagtegaal, who will introduce himself a little bit later. And I'm happy to see so many people joining again on this important topic for us. So today we are going to talk with a regulator, which is different from the previous time. The previous time we had Bart Groothuis here on the call from the European Parliament. So today I'm from Secura, a Bureau Veritas company. We help raising your cyber resilience, and we do that from a holistic point of view, people, process, and technology, as well as much as possible international standards. Today with me we have Jasper Nagtegaal. He's from the RDI, and you can introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for welcoming me here, Sjoerd. My name is Jasper Nagtegaal. I'm as you can see in the sheet, of course, the Director Digital Resilience, one of the directorates in the Authority for Digital Infrastructure. And we oversee a lot of digital supervisory sectors in the Netherlands. And of course, NIS2 is also in our domain, which we are talking about today. Yeah.
Right. Maybe a little bit more about the Authority for Digital Infrastructure.
Yes. Well, as you could see on the previous sheet and also on this one, we address a lot of topics with the Authority for Digital Infrastructure. We have a base in radio and frequency spectrum analysis, etc. But over the last years, we came in a growth path and attained a lot of new tasks, which were starting with EIDAS, NIS1, of course, Cybersecurity Act, etc. And also in the domain of devices and products, we achieved some duties on IoT, with a modern word, of course, but maybe more known is the Cyber Resilience Act, coming regulation also from Europe. So we have a lot of responsibilities in the digital domain in our supervisory tasks. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Brings me to the agenda for today. So the idea was that we start with the legislator in the first episode and that we now move to a regulator. And it would be great if you can do the third episode with actually a company that was affected by this kind of legislation. So that's to be done in the next episode. So today I would like to recap actually what we have done in the first webinar, and then I would like to have a nice chat together with Jasper on their view on the NIS2 directive, some stories from the field. They were already responsible for the supervisory of the energy sector under the first version of the NIS. And I would also like to learn more about the visible effects of the first NIS directive and how he expects some effects from the second version of this directive. Of course, there will also be live Q&A, so feel free to ask your questions. It is an option in the GoToWebinar menu. Feel free to ask those questions. I will try to embed them already in the storyline. If not, we also have a section of Q&A at the end of this session, and we can answer further remaining questions. So please reach out to us to make it an interactive session and to get your questions actually answered. Brings me to the recap of the previous episode. So like I said, the previous episode was together with Bart Groothuis. He's a Parliament rapporteur for the NIS2 directive. And he was also the head content negotiator. And he introduced us a little bit about the backgrounds, why it was necessary, the active approach to cybersecurity within the EU, the amount of organizations that were impacted or expected to be impacted by this legislation. And it was quite an interesting story. He also explained us a little bit why there was a need for an update based on the rapid digitization that we see. The need for to make cybersecurity a boardroom topic was one of his key issues. And he explained a little bit about the key contents of the NIS2. So he told us about what organization must adhere to the NIS2. He told us about what the organizations have to do to adhere to the NIS2. And also what will the government organizations do for these kind of organizations. So it's not only about things you must do, but there's also some help you can get from those governmental organizations. There are a few key updates since the last version of our webinar. So first of all, the NIS2 has been published. That was not the case yet in the previous webinar. So the implementation deadline is now also known. It's the 18th of October 2024. There are also a few small changes that were made before the final finalization of this NIS directive. For example, there is now a formal notification period within 24 hours with an initial report within 72 hours, which changed from the draft text. They also finalized the list of essential and important industries, and they made a difference in the maximum fines that you can get, which is 10 million for essential organizations and 7 million for important organizations. And if you are a larger company, they look at the percentage of your revenue, actually. Having that said, I would like to open the conversation together with Jasper. So welcome here.
Thank you.
I will stop sharing my screen. And first of all, could you share some thoughts about the NIS2? What is your perspective on it, and what are your ideas?
Well, one word, I think it's a good thing.
Yes.
Good thing. We're happy with it. NIS1 was a good step, and it proved to be effective, I think. But we also did see in the last years that there were quite some differences between the member states in Europe and how they implemented the NIS. With, as Bart also said I think in the previous session, is digitalization as a key enabler for economy and for society, but also that brings great risks for companies evolving in that digital era. So I think security with NIS2 is a good thing. It's I think it's a key enabler for your business. I don't see it only as a burden, as a compliance issue, but if you want to make way in the digital era, I think you also have to give good attention to cybersecurity. So I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
Yes, and companies have always been responsible already for their own cybersecurity. Yeah. Do you think that the NIS2 will really make an impact to those companies?
Yes, it will, because it does not stand alone. So NIS brings a general approach, and NIS2 also a general approach to cybersecurity for a lot of sectors in the European market. But what it also does is it combines its efforts with other regulations like Cybersecurity Act or specific financial regulation, energy regulation, etc. So GDPR also part of the whole game. So I think it's not only there, but also in a broader perspective. Yeah.
Yes, and there are a few important changes, I would say, between the first and the second version of the NIS directive. And what are for you the most important differences here?
I think for us, quite obvious is the vast amount of entities coming under NIS2. So that's a lot, hundreds of essential services, and I think if you combine it with important, it's thousands of entities coming under regulation with NIS2. So,
yeah, in the Netherlands alone. Because
in the Netherlands alone.
The Netherlands.
Yeah, if you think EU-wide, it's way more. Yeah. So, but only in the Netherlands, it's quite a game changer. We are governing in supervising for all the domains under the Ministry of Economic Affairs.
Right.
And that was energy, digital infrastructure for us, and the digital service providers. It's the predecessor of important entities. You may say cloud sector, etc. That's foreseeable, but now everything widens under the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and we also have that now in our domain. So we get the postal and courier services and the extras in digital infrastructure, in the energy sector, and new subsectors like district heating and hydrogen. So we have a lot of work to do, managed service providers, etc. So we are widening, and it's a whole game changer for us, because we have to look at how is our strategy changing in our supervisory approach. Can we find enough people? Human resources is also a thing, not only for us, of course, also in the market, because
all companies will also require additional resources to comply.
Yeah, so everybody is trying to make way under NIS2, and we need people. Everybody needs people. So I think there's also a shared shared responsibility to work together, and also with market parties, commercial sector, and government to achieve the goals which are under NIS2. Yeah.
Right. And when the first NIS directive was drafted, actually, I used to work in the energy sector, and I saw, well, limited traction, at least outside the energy sector.
True.
And now it seems that there's a lot more traction for the NIS2. Do you see the same view, and why is that the case, actually?
Yeah, I did see that. NIS2 has a lot of more attention.
Right.
I think, okay, it addresses more sectors. So yeah, I think there's a more entities realize they're under the regulation now. That's one. It's also true. The entities in the energy sector, for instance, you mentioned, they were aware and they were quite mature. But the awareness on the regulation was new, so it was a little bit of a surprise. Oh, there's new regulation. But nevertheless, they were full swing in with it, with us, and working with us to achieve the goals with cybersecurity. If you look at the market for the last years, of course, ransomware, supply chain issues, people have come aware, and entities, organizations supplying services are coming aware of the risk of cybersecurity. And that's what I said earlier. It's not only a compliance issue now, it's a key enabler for your digital business. Yeah.
Yeah, and having that said, that it's already quite important to have your cybersecurity in order. Do you still think that companies need to step up to comply to the NIS2, or are they already on the right track, and don't you expect too much impact?
It differs, of course. Yeah, there has to be done a lot, and there's also has been done a lot. So, of course, bigger organizations already have ISMS in place, have a quite good awareness of what cybersecurity means in terms of governance in your organization and controls you need to have in place. But in a baseline perspective, so if you look at the more smaller organizations, I think they are struggling now. So I also hear that, of course, in network conversations. They're struggling a bit in what do they expect from me? What is a baseline? What are the common controls I really need to have? And then you see, of course, from all sorts of government organizations, commercial advisory, managed service providers, they all have some sort of advice on how to comply with. I think there's a challenge for all of us together to harmonize.
Right. And in preparing for this webinar, you also said that you see a lot of blog posts from all kinds of different companies, but that they are not always spot on, in your opinion. So what type of challenge see you there, and how can we solve that?
Obvious answer, of course, to work together, because it's also what NIS2 stipulates. If you read the directive, they want to emphasize on using standards. Standardization is a thing, and not only standardization on the regulation like Security Act, but also the use of European and international standards. So that's one, and also harmonizing and developing guidance, not only from government perspective, but within collaboration with also market parties like Secura, etc. Helping each other achieving higher maturity in cybersecurity. So I think there's the key. Yeah, working together. Yeah.
Nice. You've been involved in the implementation of the NIS1 directive already in the energy sector. So can you share a little bit more about your experience over there? Were companies well prepared? How did that go? How did you get in contact with them and build a relationship?
Yeah. That was, we had a greenfield approach. So in telecommunications, we're already there. We know the sector, and but for energy, it was new for us, energy sector. And okay, we took up the challenge, and we said, okay, let's take a custom approach. So not not saying this is a standard and you have to comply, and then we go into the checkbox list and then everything is okay, because it's not, of course. You have to know how the business works.
Right.
So that was the approach. So we started with onboarding, literally onboarding. So we started with the board. So we talked to the board, checked awareness. Are you in some sort? Do you have some sort of idea of how the governance on cybersecurity in your organization works? And that worked. Then we started with getting to know the business, assessing the basic controls in the organization, and also investing a lot on how the specific controls in the organization work. What are the challenges, the issues, etc. What standards do you use already?
Yep.
That's very important to know, because you can say, okay, we approach you with this one, and then you have to comply with this one. But if you already use a specific standard and it works, that's the starting point for the conversation for us as a supervisory authority. So, and that worked quite well, building trust from the beginning. I must say.
So you didn't come in as an auditor, but you start working on this journey together and see how we could get to the right level. Yeah.
And you see, it worked really well. Opening up from the entities involved with NIS2, they started sharing a lot more open than if you come down with a stick and say this is compliance. Right. And you do that one time and then everything is difficult. And that's, I think, the wrong approach, because if you take that approach, then you never achieve the goal of getting to a higher level of cybersecurity awareness, maturity.
That's the end goal.
That's the end goal. And I think you share that end goal, because if you have cybersecurity, you see it as an enabler for the digitalization of your business, your supply chain involving that business, then you know, okay, this is business continuity. Yeah. I have to get this right, because otherwise I'm out of business. So, and then you have a shared and aligned goal, and that goal you work together. And of course, we have a role as a supervisory authority. So of course we check, we really check if things are well prepared or well implemented, of course. But aligning the goals is very important to make it work.
And was this approach typical for the Netherlands? And do you see different approaches in other countries, or was it quite similar across Europe?
It's one of the pillars, of course, of NIS2, the divergence in implementation among across all member states. And in the Netherlands, we had a good approach on, I think, supervision and enforcement. All means were in place. It was divided among several supervisory authorities, also for the financial markets and infrastructure and transport, drinking water, etc. I know from other member states, of course, we also talk, of course, with colleagues in other member states with the sectors, of course, and we saw some sectors weren't even covered by supervisory authorities, just by policymakers, no means in place for supervisory authorities. So a lot of difference, but in the Netherlands, I think we took a good approach.
Okay.
Yeah, we're well organized, of course, in the Netherlands. Yeah. But it worked.
Yeah, and you also mentioned the word supply chain already. Especially the energy system that was in scope at that point in time. It's a chain of different companies with different roles and responsibilities in the full chain of getting energy from production to the households, I would say.
Yeah.
So did you approach it as a full supply chain and looking at the risk of the whole supply chain, or did you approach them company by company to get them and assess them on the right level?
Of course, both. But the difference we made with our approach was the first one combining with the second one. So you look at the chain. And you can look at it as a supply chain. You can also look at it as like a value chain.
Right.
So you look at the business, and suppliers are in scope of your responsibility as an entity under the NIS compliance, and NIS2 is more focusing on compliance on your supply chain. But we said, okay, we're looking at you as an entity and assessing your maturity, your cybersecurity. But we also said, okay, we want to understand the business, and we have to understand what kind of vectors factors are more in place on your risk, your cybersecurity for your business. So we did a lot of research, not only on an entity level, but also on a system-wide level, looking at the chain, looking at the value chain, the supply chain. How will it evolve? Energy transition it was also a thing. So we invested a lot in understanding how energy transition will affect the energy entities. That's new energy entities coming in place, decentralization, the use of all kinds of devices and products which will help balance the new energy grid in the future. So it's a twin transition, digital transition and energy transition walk alongside each other. So that's a lot of research for us, and that kind of insights we also use to address our entities in conversation. So then we have the inspections, we have the follow-up of inspections, etc., and that's more in the compliance chain. And then we have account conversations and roundtables. We did a 360 risk inventarization with academics, entities from the energy sector, partners in government like a National Cybersecurity Center, etc. They all participated in assessing what kind of system risks come with energy transition and do we have to address in the future. So system-wide approach.
Yes, and many of those companies were in the public space. Some of those companies were also in the private space. Did you see a big difference between those two?
How you mean them?
So, for example, the grid operators are public companies, I would say, while energy production facilities, they are private companies, and maybe more focused on profit and so on. So did you see a big difference between those two types of companies?
Yeah, you see a difference. I think grid operators were a little bit further already in the topic, but there are also in the production line. Also, I think they're quite well organized. Of course, there were some. It was really new, so they had to start with risk assessment at first, but they're all doing it. So there was no. I didn't get any questions. Also, with all the onboarding with the board members. This is strange. I don't want to. Of course, when regulation came in place for that part of the energy sector, of course, a lot of questions. But when we started, they were in acceptance and said, okay, we're going to do this. And what helps is if you take a risk based approach, because especially in that kind of industry, you have health, safety, environment, and you have that on a risk-based approach in cycles you develop. So if you take that approach and you add cybersecurity as a new risk, then you can combine it with the holistic approach on HSE, and that works. So
nice. Nice. And how did those companies know that they were actually in scope and should comply to this legislation? Is this something they need to find out themselves, or did they get a letter?
Under a letter, of course. Okay. And also I think maybe some phone calls and other means of communication, of course. But we have delegated acts under the implementation of the NIS in the Netherlands, and under that delegated act, there is a category or individual appointment of categories or entities which have to comply with the NIS regulation. That's assessed on the basis of risk assessment of the sector by the policy department, so ministry, and then the specific policy departments. They assess, okay, this entity should comply with. They define thresholds in the delegated acts under the WBNI, the Dutch implementation, and then and then of course you get a letter, but that's an identification letter. So the law stipulates you are under compliance with the WBNI, the NIS implementation, and then you get a letter, of course, you identifying, and then we get along and say, okay, and now we're starting with the whole supervision process, and then we start with the onboarding.
There was already a question from the audience here, is that will this approach of getting to know your customer be applied to NIS2 as well, or will you use a different approach there?
I really want to, but I'm not sure how it works out because, as I said earlier, hundreds and thousands of entities coming under new regulation. So we have to take also 23 and part of 24 to assess our own approach on sector, because I know it works. I know it works to work not on focusing on incidents, looking at where did you make a mistake, and then putting out fines, because that doesn't work.
Right.
You have to set your intensity of supervision in the front of the chain. So you have to focus on information, stimulation, etc. And that takes a custom approach. It takes time. So you have to invest with people and know the business. And we want to extend that approach, and we do not want to.
Do you think it's sufficiently scalable?
Scalable to some part, but a risk-based approach must be part of that, because you cannot scale up indefinitely with people. That's not feasible. So you have to switch to some sort of automated or a more harmonized approach, which you combine, I think, also with other supervisory authorities in the Netherlands. So you have to work together on that one, and then we still will have a custom approach, but more focused on the higher risk level entities which come in scope of NIS2 in the Netherlands. And how that exactly will work out, I don't know, because we still are still in the process ourselves of thinking that out this year.
Yeah, because we already mentioned the date 18th of October 2024. Can most companies expect a letter at that point in time, an inspection soon after, or how will that work?
The NIS2 will work with thresholds, of course. So there is some more automated appointment of the entities falling under NIS. So that's a little bit different into the NIS1 approach, where you get a letter and a custom approach. There will be also some sort of registry also under NIS2. So there is the process of that, but that's also worked out now in the process with all the policy departments and supervisors. Everybody's working together to on how to implement NIS2. So that will get out in the process of that on how you will know that you're under NIS2. How are we starting? We will be starting in October 24, and of course earlier with the onboarding process of the sectors we have under supervisory responsibilities, and then we will start based on the strategy we use with a sort-like process, of course, we use now. So there will be an onboarding process, an assessment process, etc. But for some entities more intense, like we do it now, and for some entities it will be more a general approach. But not we will not focus in the first start in October on incidents looking for the fault. We'll have to onboard, but it does not say you do not have to comply. So everybody knows now. Everybody's looking at this webinar. So start with your process.
So at the beginning, one of your slides already, you saw that there's more and more horizontal and vertical laws and legislations popping up. So it's a complex landscape of all kind of rules and regulations that companies now have to comply to in different sectors. Do you recognize this, and how should this be tied together within a company? Because they can't separately look at them all one after the other, I would say.
No, and that's where you have to take a look at the system. Because if you take a look at it only from a sectoral perspective or one topic perspective, like artificial intelligence or privacy legislation, or then you take only the sectoral approach or the general approach of privacy or another focus point. European Commission has thought out an ecosystem of verticals like NIS2 or specific financial regulation or otherwise
apply to specific sectors.
Specific sectors, and then you have the horizontal legislation like the product legislation under the Cyber Resilience Act or the Cybersecurity Act, which works up a lot of certification schemes for specific supply chain issues like cloud, industrial control system also coming into place. Also for telecommunications, maybe for AI, EIT, maybe all lots of schemes coming into place. And you have to use those schemes alongside with the other legislation on a horizontal level to address your responsibilities for your supply chain. But all those schemes address, of course, entities involved, because that's the central point. You're an organization, you have to comply. But around you, there is developing a whole landscape of supervisory authorities, which all want a part of the cake. So the one comes, okay, we want to look at your product, and he says, okay, but you're also a cloud service provider, and we want to look at your organization for cloud, but you're also addressing in your cloud services a specific essential entity. So we're also looking at that from a sectoral perspective, from
privacy point of view as well.
Privacy point of view, so the DPA, and everybody has to have some sort of grasp of how are you doing on all those compliance issues. So legal and compliance departments within the entities are, I think, maybe a little bit nervous now with all the new regulation, and that also brings the new challenge of working together, because it's not feasible to work alone. So work together and use the whole system to harmonize, and that's I think not a thing we achieve in 24, but that's a thing we're going to achieve in the years coming. Yeah.
So it's at least about cooperation with the regulators within a country, but you're also handling multinationals. So there are companies that are either headquartered or not in the Netherlands, in your case, but have their services in many more European countries.
Yeah.
How is this gonna work?
If you look at NIS2 for cross-border sectors, there is a little bit of harmonization on regulation. So NIS2 says, I think, for maybe digital infrastructures, a real cross-border European sector, there comes some delegated acts under NIS. So there's harmonization of regulation. And there are, of course, rules for jurisdiction, where you have your headquarters stated in Europe. So there's jurisdiction question, so the supervisory authority in a certain member state can address the entity involved in the issue of compliance under NIS2. But we also work together. So we do that already, like for the cloud sector and online marketplaces. We already work together with supervisory authorities in other member states, because regulation applies to all member states on an implementing act, also on a certain level. So there we're trying to harmonize our interpretation of certain regulation. And under NIS2, that is a focus point also under the regulation, but also from us in the Netherlands, because we already work together here in the Netherlands with all the entities working up. We have a state of cybersecurity on essential services. We worked it up together and put our information combined. So we have a wide scope of what do we think is important and how do we look at our sectors. And that we want to achieve also in a European level under NIS2. So
are you going to do inspections together then, or how would that look like?
It's possible. Okay. Yeah. So you can invite other supervisory authorities in other member states, or you can say, okay, I'll do this part of the inspection and I transfer the information to you, and you can work out the rest of the inspection in your country. So that's also possible, but mutual assistance is a key thing in one single European market.
Right. One of the topics that also seems to buzz around is the personal accountability of the board.
Yeah.
How does this work in practice actually, and how likely is it that this will be enforced?
Well, it can be enforced, of course, because otherwise it's not a regulation. So yeah, it's a new one also for us, because like I said earlier, enforcement means were also in the Netherlands quite well already implemented in the legislation here. But in other member states, not yet. So that was the evaluation also on the NIS1. We have to do better, and that's why a lot of enforcement means are quite extensive, written down in NIS2. In the Netherlands, that doesn't make a lot of difference on the most of those enforcement means. In other member states, it does, because they weren't that far. But in Netherlands, we are quite well organized on that topic. The new one is, of course, the personal liability point, and that's also stated in NIS2, and that's also how I will approach it right now. Is it's end of pipe, so there has to be a lot of neglect in advance before we get to that
it's point. First on the company, and you're trying to improve, you give them some warnings.
Yeah, and that also works out with fines or other sorts of sanctions you use to make an entity comply. It's also always
kind of a last resort.
It's a resort you work to, and because neglect and if you really do not want to comply, then we have something to address, and then you get in a faster way to the end of pipe. But we always start at the front, because we want you to be aware, to be mature, and if you have that in place and you're doing all the right things, then there is no reason to get to that point at first. But in the end, it may be possible. And then there is, of course, the question of how to implement it, because we don't know. It's new for us as an enforcement mean, so we have to wait in the coming year on how to analyze that specific topic, and then how to implement that in legislation in the Netherlands. So that's also for us a little bit of a new one.
Understood. Yeah. And also the accountability for the board members might be relatively new. Do you think they are sufficiently skilled at this point in time, or do they require kind of training to be able to better to be accountable?
I think right away, all board members need training on cybersecurity. Some don't, some really need, of course, but that's in every organization, I think. But yeah, training is important because it's a key point for your business. Cybersecurity is, you have a responsibility as a board member for your financial and your technical organization, and cyber is a key part of that. New governance code came out. You have the IT audit function, of course, in your organization. All kinds of means which you can use to address your cyber awareness as a board member. Use it, I think. There are a lot of ways to address that. I think if you look at what was it? It was in the Dutch Financial Times, het Financieel Dagblad. There was a topic on cybersecurity employees caving in under the pressure of cybersecurity, and then they really need the support of their board members on this topic. So please make it said often, make it chefsache, make it a boardroom issue. But to make it, because it really helps your employees working really hard on making cybersecurity succeed in your organization.
You should feel supported and work on the same goals. Right.
It's not only the IT department anymore. No.
Right. And authority responsible for the oversight, like yours. While we also have national cybersecurity centers, and they are more also in an incident response role. How does that work together? And is every incident that you might report to the national cybersecurity centers immediately also reported to the authorities? How do you share data?
We work together. On a good base. So we talk to each other quite often. We exchange our perspective on certain sectors because we have a sectoral approach on certain sectors. NCSC, of course, does all the sectors, and public administration, of course. There is a double reporting obligation in the Netherlands right now.
Both to the authorities as well as the incident.
And we don't we do not exchange the reporting. So you have to report on a double base to NCSC and the authority in the Netherlands. You see in practice that we receive often the same incident report as NCSC does, because they don't want to report on different levels, and our greenfield approach we talked about earlier works really well. So they're quite open to us, and they are not afraid to report an incident, because I encourage them to report, because
so it's not immediately connected to fines or whatever.
No, it's not directly, and that's also what NIS2 stipulates. Incident reporting does not give a higher level of liability or neglect. No, it's a good thing. Actually, yeah, it's the other way around. Be open, work on a just culture. Incidents happen. How are you in control of your incidents? Do you learn? Do you evaluate, etc.? Yeah. So that's how it works, and I hope to take this approach also in the coming years on the NIS2.
Yeah. And the NIS2, you already told that it will be a lot of work for you as an organization, but it also writes about independent bodies and trained professionals and competent authorities. Is there also room for some private companies to help out there? How will that work?
Yeah, also on the NIS2, I did read a passage in the NIS2 about that, and there is room. I think in the Netherlands we already take that approach in a good manner with a lot of collaboration, coordination between private parties in the Netherlands and the public party. So I think that's a good thing. I think we have to extend on that also on the NIS2, because not only for the employees, of course, we are not enough people to address the challenges we have, but it's really a good thing to lean on that, because if you look at managed IT security managed service providers, they play a big part in maintaining cybersecurity in the supply chain or in the governance of entities falling under NIS2. So if you neglect those private parties, then you don't have any base to get to that higher level of maturity. There's not really a scheme or other way of knowing which parties have a certain role, private parties under NIS2. So it's for now mostly based on policies and cooperation between private parties and authorities, etc.
Yeah, and linked to that, one way to prove that you're in control of your cybersecurity is by certifications like ISO 27K or IEC 62443 for more OT. Do you expect that to become more common, and can you rely on the certifications as an authority?
We use them. So yes, we advocate on them. Yes. So because if you it's not compliance, but we say standardization really works in it's a really good mean to address the challenges you have in making cybersecurity work in your organization. And we have the conversation always with our entities on which standards do you use. There are some standards which work quite well. Then we also advocate on certain standards, not specifically on one, because that's not what we do, because we are an authority. We do not say this one, but we say you have this one, and that one. But we do advocate on the user standards. It's very important, and there are some good ones. Yeah, of course. 27,000 is of course widely used. It's an ISMS, so it's more on a process level, and like the 62443 is, for instance, usable in the OT corner of the entities we approach. So that's also commonly adopted. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe to wrap up a little bit, and maybe some one or two questions after that. Yeah, I trust that you as an organization also learned a lot from the implementation from the first NIS directive.
Yeah.
Is there anything you will do differently for NIS2 actually?
That's a good one. Yeah. What would I do differently? Maybe what I wouldn't do differently, let's start with that one, is the greenfield approach, the custom approach we did on the energy sector and the digital infrastructure sector, because it really worked well. We achieved a lot. We did see improve those entities in those sectors very well. We have a very good relationship with those entities. So there's a lot achieved. So that's a good one. Which one is different? The important entities. That's now the digital service providers.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult approaching that sector because there was no registration under NIS1, so we didn't know which entities were under the compliance of NIS1. So we made a guess. We talked with branch organizations, etc. But we didn't really have a good approach on them. So if I would do something different, I would invest more in important entities on reaching out to them and having them come to us, and in that way have some sort of growth on how to make them thrive to a higher level of cybersecurity. Yeah. That's a different one. Yeah.
Right. And there's another question from the audience coming in here. What will be the range of controls posed upon companies under NIS2? Will it be as broad as the first version of the WVNI? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
It's a range of controls.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the principle-based approach, of course, NIS1. NIS2 addresses a little bit more, but that we already did in delegated acts also in the Netherlands, but also still on a principle-based approach. So if you look at the controls you have to implement, they're not quite different. They were already there. Also for IT and OT, it's not a difference, but they're more emphasized now under NIS2. So you have a little bit more of an idea of what you're looking at, and it's more coupled to standards, certification, etc. So it's more clear now what you can or have to do, but it's not really a big difference in controls. Maybe the focus on supply chain management. That's also not new,
yeah,
but it's more emphasized now, and it's also more important. Yeah.
Cool. That brings us at the end of this webinar. Actually, I will share some contact details with you later on. So if you have further more questions, you can always approach us. There are also some questions unanswered in the question and answer box. We'll make sure that we answer those persons, and we might also write a blog on it to make sure that everybody can see those answers. At the end of this webinar, we also have a few questions for you. So please stay on the line. We will stop this webinar and you will get a questionnaire about the topics that were handled today, if you like them, if you like these type of webinars, and what type of things you would like to see in future. So once again, Jasper, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sjoerd, for having me.
Good luck with your tasks, actually. It's a massive task.
And
all of you, thank you for joining, and hope to see you soon.